My name is Claire Whitaker. I am 38 years old. I once believed that the day I closed the bakery I had spent more than a decade building would be the most painful day of my life. I was wrong. The most painful day was the day my own family decided I no longer had any value to them. That afternoon, the first winter rain covered the streets of Portland. Claire stood alone inside the empty kitchen of Sweet Willow Bakery. The chairs had already been stacked on top of the tables. The ovens had gone cold. The familiar scent of fresh bread that had been part of her life for years now lingered only as a fading memory in the air. 3 straight months of losses had finally crushed the business she had devoted her youth to building. She locked the front door for the last time. The click of the lock echoed sharply, like the final period at the end of a chapter of her life. During the drive home, Claire could not stop thinking about the bills that still needed to be paid, the business loan hanging over her head, the reality of starting over from nothing. Yet no matter how worried she was, she still believed she had one thing left: her family. The White House at the end of the familiar street had always been the place she returned to. At least, that was what she used to believe. When Claire stepped into the living room, something immediately felt wrong. Her father sat silently in his chair. Her younger brother Ethan stood by the window. A large suitcase rested in the middle of the floor. No one greeted her. No one asked how her day had gone. Claire forced a tired smile. She told them the bakery had officially closed. No one looked surprised, as if they had already known. Her father let out a long sigh and slowly rose to his feet. He looked at his daughter with an expression she had never seen before. Then he said a sentence that shattered her world. "Ethan and his family are moving in this weekend. You need to find somewhere else to stay." For a moment, Claire thought she had heard him wrong. She looked at her father, then at her brother. No one objected. No one seemed uncomfortable. It was as if this decision had been made long ago. Ethan crossed his arms. He explained that his video game store was struggling. His wife had recently lost her job. Their 2 children needed stability. Her father said Claire was strong enough to take care of herself. The words felt like a blade of ice. Because for years, Claire had been the one quietly paying the utility bills. The one who arranged repairs when the roof leaked. The one who covered her father's medical expenses after his surgery. The one who always showed up whenever the family needed help, but at the moment she needed them most. No one stood beside her. Then Ethan suddenly asked a question. His voice was filled with concern. "So who's going to keep helping with the rent for my store?" The room fell silent. Claire stared at her brother for a long moment. And finally, she understood. To them, her failure was not a tragedy. It was a financial problem, a source of money that had suddenly disappeared. And in that moment, the last thing tying Claire to that house disappeared as well. She turned and walked upstairs, packed a few essentials. No tears. No arguments. Because deep inside, a door had just closed forever. And somewhere hundreds of miles away from Portland, a secret that no one in her family knew existed was quietly waiting to be revealed. Claire drove away from Portland long after darkness had settled over the city. There were no phone calls. No text message. No one asked where she was going that night. What hurt her most was not being forced to leave the house. It was realizing that her disappearance seemed to mean nothing to the people who had once called themselves her family. 3 hours later, her car came to a stop in front of a wooden cabin overlooking Hayden Lake in Idaho. The dark water stretched beneath the moonlight. The silence was so complete that the only sound was the wind moving through the pine trees. Claire stepped out of the car. She stood on the porch for a long time. This was not her first visit to this place, but it was the first time she truly needed it. 6 years earlier, when her bakery business was thriving, Claire had quietly established a small investment company called Evergreen Holdings. Over the years, she used her remaining profits to purchase undervalued commercial properties in growing towns. No one knew, not even her father. People had always assumed Claire was simply a hardworking baker. No one realized she was building something else for her future. A foundation completely separate from her family. On her first night at the lakeside house, Claire barely slept. Yet, for the first time in many years, her mind felt lighter. No more paying other people's bills. No more endless requests for help. No more feeling like she had to constantly prove her worth. A week later, she called Sophia Bennett, a college friend who had spent years helping manage operations for major food service companies. Sophia had invited Claire to work with her many times before, but Claire had always declined because she was too busy taking care of her family. This time, her answer was yes. Together, they began building a consulting firm dedicated to helping struggling food businesses get back on their feet. Claire's real-world experience quickly set them apart. The first client arrived, then a second, then a third. Slowly, her life began moving in an entirely new direction. 3 weeks after leaving Portland, Claire's phone finally rang. It was her father. For a brief moment, a small part of her still hoped he was calling to apologize, or at least to ask if she was doing all right. Instead, he told her that Ethan was struggling to pay for the children's school expenses. He wanted to know whether Claire could help cover part of the cost. Claire remained silent. She stared out at the lake beyond the window. Then she calmly said no. 2 days later, Ethan sent her a text message. Not to check on her, not to ask how she was doing. He only wanted to know whether the streaming subscription Claire had been paying for had been cancelled. Claire read the message. Then she laughed. For the first time in months, not because it was funny, but because she had finally seen the truth so clearly that it could no longer be denied. Her family had never remembered Claire as a daughter. They remembered her as a solution. But what none of them knew was that while they still believed Claire was struggling to find a job, Evergreen Holdings had quietly completed another major acquisition. A deal that would one day leave the entire Whitaker family speechless when they discovered who was truly in control of the game. 14 months after leaving the house in Portland, Claire Whitaker's life had changed in ways no one in her family could have imagined. The consulting firm she and Sophia had built was now overseeing operations for dozens of food businesses across the Pacific Northwest. Evergreen Holdings continued to expand as well. The properties Claire had quietly acquired over the years were steadily increasing in value. But what satisfied her most was not the money. It was the peace. For the first time in years, she woke up each morning without having to solve someone else's problems. Meanwhile, back in Portland, things were moving in the exact opposite direction. Ethan's video game store continued to lose money. The debts kept piling up. The rent increased after a new owner took over the building. Eventually, Ethan's wife could no longer handle the pressure. She took their 2 children and moved in with her parents. Ethan was left alone with a mountain of unpaid bills. Once again, it was Claire's father who stepped in to deal with the crisis. He mortgaged part of his assets in an attempt to help his son stay afloat. But none of his efforts were enough. Then, on a cool autumn morning, an official letter arrived at Ethan's store. It was a lease renewal notice. Ethan intended to sign it as he always had. But when he noticed the name of the new ownership company at the bottom of the document, he suddenly froze. Evergreen Holdings. The name sounded strangely familiar. 2 days later, his father began researching the company. And for the first time, he discovered the truth. The owner of Evergreen Holdings, the person who controlled the building where Ethan's business operated, was Claire, the daughter they had forced out of the house on the day she lost everything. The entire family was stunned. No one could believe that the woman they had once viewed as a failure was actually the owner of assets worth far more than anything they had ever imagined. A week later, Claire's father appeared at her lakeside home. He looked much older. His hair was grayer. His shoulders no longer carried the strength they once had. Claire opened the door. The 2 of them stood there, looking at each other for a long moment. For the first time in more than a year, neither spoke first. Eventually, her father broke the silence. He apologized. Not because of the money. Not because of the building. But because he finally realized how unfairly he had treated his daughter for so many years. He had always believed Claire was strong. Always believed she could handle anything. And that belief had led him to take every sacrifice she made for granted. Claire listened quietly. She did not get angry. She did not accuse him. She did not tell him about the night she had cried alone after leaving home. When he finished speaking, she answered softly, "I did not leave because I lost that room. I left because that was the day I realized I had never truly had a place in that house." The man standing before her lowered his head. He could not find a single word to argue with her. That afternoon, he left alone. Claire stood on the porch watching the sunlight shimmer across the lake. She did not feel victorious. She did not feel vindicated. She simply felt free. Because at last, she had stopped living for other people's approval. Some people only recognize your value when you stop saving them. And sometimes, the greatest success is not proving that they were wrong. It is building a life so fulfilling that you no longer need their permission to be happy.